Recording now, hopefully. Okay, here we go. You should have seen something pop up. And we are going to be talking about our week 6 recap. So week 6 started out with a bang, which was copyright transfers. I bet some of you probably thought it was, I wouldn't say interesting, but maybe horrifying a little bit, that like all of a sudden you are transferring over everything that you worked on so diligently over the last 2 to 3 years, 4 or 5 years to the journals, and they become the owners of it. And in transferring that, you have to ask them to reproduce anything that you publish through them, right? That's a little bizarre to first kind of process. Just a second. Hey girls, can you turn the TV off actually? Thank you. And so there are other ways around that. And one of the things that was most kind of interesting to me was that there are journals that the moment you submit, you can transfer that copyright over, which is pretty amazing. Can imagine like, I'm sure they transfer it back the moment they reject it, but that seems like a lot to kind of navigate in the writing process. What is most common in my experience, and I think Rich would say the same, is the moment you have an accept notification, all the paperwork starts coming in from the journal, and you need, you either sign on behalf of all the authors, or you need all the authors kind of to click on it and transfer the copyright over to the journal. There are some exceptions. If you have folks on your paper that are working for the USDA, which may be the case for folks that are working in the court and in forestry, things like that, there's a play, and maybe there's a Canadian equivalent too, I don't know. But like a federal government agency like that, at that level, often you have to note that because they will trump that copyright. Another thing I've noticed, if you go to Google Scholar, and if you have a Google Scholar account and you have any papers in there, it'll tell you, you are missing 3 of 5 open access versions of your papers. If you click on that, what it does is it's kind of crawling through all the data, and they're looking at the acknowledgments and seeing who's acknowledging federal funds, and that will trump the copyrights as well. And I just uploaded some this week where I'm just uploading to some my PDFs to a Google Drive somewhere. I have no idea where, and that is available for everyone to see outside of the paywall, which is kind of nice. So if you have a federal grant that you are doing your research on, make sure you note it. I know it's kind of a pain to look up the grant number and all that stuff because they ask for all that. But put that in there, and then it'll give you more exposure once you get through the other side of the submission process.
Yeah, Andrew, I got to add the sweet thing. It's in the public domain, so you can share your work creatively on any website to get it out there to people, and that's just nice. So my advice: always work with a federal person.
Yeah, I mean they're often top-notch researchers. Like
they are.
There's a real grooming process to get into one of those positions, and beyond that, the perks that come with publishing with them is just great. So add them to your committees, please. The reading goes on to say that this, the aggressive copyright kind of transfer that the publishers have is to protect your work and you and the journal's interests, although they're protecting it from you in a way. But there are other ways around this. I like this. This is from MDPI. We talked with Mike Martin before, who is with MDPI Forest the first week of our discussion session of this program. And they go a different route than actual copyright. So they open things up in a Creative Commons license, which means that people are able to download and read the paper for free. But they still want you to attribute. You can't just make it your own. So it's still being protected, but people are free to just grab it and pass it around all that they want, right? But they do, if they are gonna like take one of your figures or what have you and use it as their own, they cannot do that. They have to attribute it to you and get that kind of that permission going. So there are different ways to go about this than what the book states. I don't think the book has really caught up to this at the moment.
Yeah, I think the big thing I missed was they didn't say anything about rights and permissions. And so it's really easy. You could go to any major journal and just search for rights and permissions. So you want to use a particular image, you go through the process and they'll grant it. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
the way to actually get the official permission.
And here's a rights and permissions example from that's right below. Yeah, right below where I showed you that Creative Commons license. And they have this is from MDPI again, but it has really clear guidelines. So you need permission if you are if you're like, this is for you submitting something to them, and they want to make sure that you're not breaking any of these rules before you submit. And it goes for people using your stuff as well. You can't submit anything to them that is already published somewhere else under copyright. You can't just so that means, like, if your methods from a paper are under copyright with another journal, you can't just blatantly grab that whole same methods because you're chunking that paper into several papers and then put it back in there, because that would be breaking copyright, which is what we discussed before about self-plagiarism. You can quote. We don't really quote in science, but if you're in the social sciences, you could quote in your work and attribute like their words in text with a citation. But there's a limit to that. You can't quote like 12 pages out of the 13, that you submit. Use of tables, charts, graphs, and schemes and artworks where if they're unaltered or only slightly modified, like you added some color to them because it's an online journal and they don't care about things being in grayscale, that is something you cannot do, right? You need permission for that. And then photographs as well. There are places to get stock photos if you want them, and then they will give you the guidelines for how to use them. A good one for forestry is Forestry Images, which is run by I think UGA and University of Georgia and the Forest Service in a joint collaborative. And they will tell you exactly what you have to do if you want to use one of their images for your paper. Your best bet is to just take a ton of pictures when you're doing your research and use your own if possible, if they turn out well.
If you didn't mention this, Andrew, Wikipedia, it's an easy way to find things in public domain for use.
And so Wikipedia and Wiki Images, or is it Wiki Images?
Yeah.
They will have everything under Creative Commons licensing. So, and there are various shades of that license, and just, again, make sure you are following it. And it's really easy to follow. They'll tell you what you can do and not do with that. So how to submit a manuscript. This is kind of probably the most interesting part of the today's talk, and I'm sure that's what we're going to spend most of our discussion on. But this can be kind of a challenge. I remember my first time submitting a manuscript. I was submitting to an ASHS, American Society of Horticultural Sciences journal. They have a 67-page style guide, and I'm not a details person. So I looked at that, my eyes glazed over, and I'm like, I'll just make sure this is a really well-written, manuscript that is scientifically valid, and I'm sure it'll all work out. They have paid they have paid editors, and that did not go over well. I got 2 desk rejects before they even from the gatekeeper administrator before I even got it to the editor-in-chief, and I'm like, they're just trying to train me, and they were trying to train me. I'm sure they could see I was a new author because I'm a grad student, and they're making sure that I figured out the process before I wasted their time. And unfortunately, there's thousands of journals, and most of them have their own style. There's a few out there now that are like, submit it any way you want. Urban forestry and urban greening, like, they pretty much are that way. And we'll deal with it. Same thing with like citations styles for like the citations. They don't really care. Within limits.
Let me add to that. Yes, we do care. We may give you a little grace, but it reflects very poorly on a manuscript when it's submitted, that if someone looks and all the references are in just a lot of different formats. So if you're going to pick one, even though we're a little accepting, be consistent.
Yeah, I would say yes. Style probably doesn't matter, but consistency does.
Yeah.
So have your own style at least, So one thing that's kind of a universal for a lot of the journals we submit to is, and we'll talk about this in discussion, but you double space a lot of times. I think this is a hangover from when people were writing in comments and proofing marks, and you typically blind your article. So when you're drafting it, you have your title and you have your byline and all that stuff in there, because you're kind of making a copy of you're kind of copying like the formatting of the final paper in the journal you're submitting to, right? But the moment you submit to a journal that requires blind review, you need to pull all that stuff out. So you pull the byline out, you put all the authors out, you go inside and you make sure that nothing in the acknowledgments or nothing in the methods will give away who you are, so that you can have a blind review and people won't know who you are. And that works in your favor sometimes. Like if you're a well-known author, people would probably be biased towards accepting your work and accepting you just because you're like a rock star in your field. If you're a new one, or they see you're a grad student, that could also weigh on how they view a paper, right? So from that regard, it's supposed to make things more universal. I think that'd be something we can discuss later, Rich, is the merits of open review, single blind review, and double blind review. I think that'd be very interesting. So there's different manuscript submission portals. The one that I love is like things like urban forestry and urban greening, or Frontiers. I know we had debates on whether Frontiers was worth the digital paper it's printed on before, but the submission systems are modern and very easy to navigate. There are other journals that are very archaic. Rich just made me submit to a journal recently, actually this paper right here, if you want. Oh wait, it actually has it in there, don't look at that. That had us put a lot of metadata in there. Like we actually had to put the word count for every section, so we had to separate out the abstract, the title, the what it means to the industry, the body of the text, every single figure had to be uploaded separately, and then we had to have metadata input for every single one of it. And that was a nightmare, honestly. I had COVID for a while, and I had COVID brain, and I couldn't even figure it out. I was in a fog and I couldn't make it work. So
Yeah, Andrew, I was just trying to break you. That's the only reason I said submit there. Didn't work.
The whole research in academia is about is breaking your friends. So some journals, so once you get through that process, it'll go to the next stage, which we'll talk about next week. But there's some other things that may happen at the submission stage. So some journals, and MDPI is the one that I know, will ask if you want to submit a preprint. And a preprint is just putting up the unreviewed version of your manuscript out there for people to look at. And everyone can look at it. There's a comment section here, so you can actually have more people like give you feedback on your document. And then you can easily update with a new version that will show the trail of like what was first uploaded and what the next upload was. So you can update it as needed to account for the comments you're getting from other folks, right? And it's kind of like an open review to whoever is interested in your field. The cool thing about this is it gets your work out there a lot sooner, which will help people know that something's in the pipeline. And they may cite it already. Cecil said that his work with COVID on this in trees was among his highest cited work, and it never was even published before. It was still working through the publication process at the time. So, and yeah, Rich.
Yeah, I got to add something. When I was an undergrad, I remember learning that the time from finishing the research to getting it actually published used to be like 2 years. And now it could still be a year from time of submitting it and it's finally in print after it goes through the review process. But it's really just cutting off that time frame to get novel information, and it may get rejected, and that's fine, but it at least gets the idea out there. And that's all I have to add on that.
Yeah, and if your paper was rejected, like this, actually not this one, but one that we put on preprints was rejected, we just resubmitted it to a different journal, and the substance didn't really change that much. We updated some of the comments from the reviewers, but and I could put that up on here now as a new version. But most articles have a home unless there's just a real critical flaw, which will probably show up in the comments of this right here.
Right.
And then another thing that journals are doing, they're asking you where you're storing your data. More of the progressive ones like the Frontiers and like Urban Forestry, Urban Greening's always been pretty progressive. They just had like the editors that are pushing what folks can do, and they were like one of the first that were doing like graphical abstracts and highlights and all that in the journals I submit to. So one thing they'll do is ask where you're putting your data, and you have to say, I am putting the data here, or it's going to be here, or it is going to be available upon request by the author, or it's not available, and if it's not, you have to explain why. And there could be a good reason. So like I work with tree risk data that is tied to neighborhood data. So if you have an inventory of trees in front of people's houses, and there are some trees that are risky and some trees that are not, a city doesn't want you putting that out there for everyone to see, because it may take them a while to get to all those risky trees, right? And then there's human health data, right? If you have medical data that you're working with, people want that private. There's really strict laws around that, and you just can't put that up online. But if you're measuring the growth of a sedge in a riparian area, and there's probably no reason to if that's something you generated yourself, no reason to put it up online. And there are things out there. I don't do this normally myself, honestly. I've been putting data sets on ResearchGate, so that's one place I've done it. But there's things like Jupyter Notebook, which is, I think this is free software which allows you to use it as like a lab notebook in your lab, and then it has ways to just share the data online. Another thing for like the really tech savvy folks out there is this is GitHub. So there's an article that I read right now where the authors showed how to make really cheap tree motion sensors for measuring tree sway. And they put all of the 3D printed files for 3D printing the housings and all the documentation and videos for making these things on GitHub. Here's another example. This is someone I work with, Toby Jackson at Cambridge. He put all of his code. So someone mentioned, like, what do we do with our R code if we made changes to it and want to show people what we did? GitHub will allow you to put both the data and the R code up there, and it'll say down here in languages, what languages are there, so people kind of know, okay, I have to be savvy in MATLAB in this case to really get a hold of what's going on here. And there's a lot you can't just you can put data just online, but you need metadata to really explain what's going on. Otherwise, people may get in trouble with your data. I mean, if you just have some file headings that you think are intuitive to you, or worse, are not intuitive to anyone, just like a code, how does someone make any sense of that? And can they make mistakes and make wrong assumptions because they didn't take the time to reach out to you like they should, right? And you just put it out there and they just grab it. So if you're going to put out data, you really need to explain exactly what everything means. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of calls if it's popular data, or people may use it the wrong way. So that's kind of these are like more bonuses beyond the reading. We're gonna talk. My questions for Rich kind of really do take on summary of the reading and some of the things that were covered in the chapters. So Richard Hauer is a lifelong mentor of mine. He was my undergraduate advisor at Stevens Point. I saw a lot of Stevens Point people in our queue. There's a reason for that. I went there as an undergraduate. I love the school. Rich is, besides teaching, being a teaching phenomenon, the guy publishes a ton, and he is an associate editor for Urban Forestry and Urban Greening. And he takes the role very seriously and is very aggressive in his reviews and getting things out in a timely manner for folks. So he'll have a lot of great insights. He's been doing it for a long time. He knows what flies and what doesn't fly. and what will irk reviewers and what won't. So I look forward to the conversation today. We're going to bounce like we did before between my questions and your questions. And I think with that, I will open up with our icebreaker, and then I will find my questions and we'll go through there. So the icebreaker, Rich, that I've been asking every single speaker since probably the second week is, do you remember your first writing experience and the first time you submitted a journal article? What was it like? Was it great, terrible, traumatic? What was the outcome and what did you learn from it?
I got to tell two things. My first one was pretty cool. It was back in the good old days when you'd actually use a typewriter and make your manuscript. No, we actually used a word processor, but you'd make a copy, you'd print it out, you'd make 3 photocopies of it, and then put it in an envelope and go to the post office, and you'd mail it to the journal. And then about 2-3 months later, you'd get feedback that either rejected, major revisions, minor. And then you'd take all these handwritten notes, then you'd have to go back and make revisions and resubmit through this US Postal Service system. It was actually pretty cool. Some of the modern systems are kind of painful, like Andrew was saying, of all the information you have to do. My advice, when you submit online, plan for a half a day and hope you can get done in an hour. Is that a fair statement, Andrew?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. When you're submitting, plan for half a day.
And hope for you'll get done in an hour, because there will be things they'll ask you for, like all the email addresses of your 17 collaborators. Great. All right. Click. But probably the one that was most traumatic was I just finished up my PhD and I was submitting something I thought was just golden. And I can't believe the reviewer came back so harsh at me. And it literally, I took so much offense. So my advice to you, take no offense at reviewers. They are helping you out. They are really guiding you to take a paper that is maybe pretty good, or maybe actually really good, to make it even better. So that's all the reviewers are doing. They're also looking critically to say, should it be submitted and rejected or not. But in that process, I went through 2 editors for a journal because I took offense. I delayed this paper probably 2.5 years getting published. Yeah, it went through 2 editors of the journal. It went through 6 different reviewers. It kept timing out, and I finally just sucked it up. And even though I didn't necessarily agree with the reviewer on one of the ways to do the modeling, my substitution then was I modeled their way and I also kept my way, and then made a contrasting of that. So yeah, don't take offense, but yeah, that was traumatic. It's like, my PhD work, it's flawless. Apparently it wasn't. So that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Procrastinating to get your reviews back only leads to more trouble. And so if you can get past the pain and attack a review, and again, like we said, often things will kind of collapse on themselves. Like one thing will fix 3 things, and it isn't as bad as it looks from the start. It'll make your life easier.
And it never is. What I learned from that process was take what I thought was a negative, build it into a positive, that they're just trying to make your paper better. They're not being mean, although you take it as they're being mean. So that was the traumatic part. Maybe we're being a very mean person, but take the negative, turn it into a positive, and it's a much better paper for it.
Are there mean reviewers out there?
There are. And by the way, when you submit, if you know someone is a jerk, you can actually put in most journals, do not send this out to review to Dr. Jerk.
Okay, that was actually a question I had. Okay, so that is an option. So for folks out there, like journals will ask you typically, because it is really hard to find reviewers, right? And even though you have subject matter experts, they're not experts in everything in tomato breeding or vegetable horticulture, let's say. So they can't know everything about vegetable horticulture. So they might want you to submit probably usually 3 names of folks that
and sometimes 5.
3 to 5 names of people you think would be good reviewers. So there's 2 questions there. The first one I'm going to ask is the one you just mentioned. Does it look bad if you pick someone to be a non-reviewer? Like, hey, please do not ask this person to review my paper.
So you're opening this up to the class, correct?
No, for you. This is for you. These are all every question.
No. As an AE of a journal, not at all. I just recognize that there's something that in the background that they're being kind enough to share it to us, that just to avoid any issues, because really that's what we want. Also, we want the peer review process to go speedy, so our numbers look great, like time from submission to In press is 17 hours. That's not going to happen, but you get the point. So we want to avoid any conflicts, and that's really all you're doing is we've got a conflict of interest. We're being ethical to tell you about that. So that's a positive.
Yeah, and you're right. Like sometimes as I think as authors, I naturally go to like a conflict of personality, but
Yep.
it could also be a conflict of interest, which is just they're a competitor and they may review this with a bias, and like especially if it's like industry kind of research or something like that. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be like a bad relationship thing.
No, and this is rare if it ever happens. I can't remember a time I've ever done it. There may have been on one journal submission that, but it was two. There's some animosity between two researchers, and just avoid that conflict. It makes life better for everyone. Now, as an editor, I could look at that and go, actually, I disagree with you. I mean, we don't have to take your advice, but generally, I've never had a time I did not.
Okay, so then the second part of my first question, then, or I mean, I guess the natural tie into that, and then I'll open it up to student questions for you. Is often you have to pick 3 to 5 people. How do you go around there? Is there just a strategy behind picking those folks? I mean,
Oh,
you want,
definitely.
yeah, because you definitely want to have someone who's going to say yes, because otherwise, if they keep struggling to find more people, it takes more time for you to review your paper.
I'm going to put my mom on there.
No,
My first cousin that really likes, no, I
what if your mom's
try.
harsh?
Yeah,
You don't
that's why
get anything right.
that's why she's no longer a reviewer for me. Yeah. No, I try to put people that I think would be genuine, good reviewers. Is there a strategy putting someone you think is going to treat you fairly? I think the people I put down, I think would look at the work and be critical that if it's junk, they're going to say so. Or if it needs work, they'll say so. Or if it's good material, they're not necessarily going to be, oh, it's my buddy. Now
Mhm.
that's an unethical thing where you behind the scenes, you would actually work with someone and say, hey, hopefully you get a chance to review it. And generally what we do is we'll look at your number of reviewers you submit, and I'll pick from one. And then I'll find one that you did not submit. So that way you kind of reduce any impartial aspects, if that was the correct word. Any
Well, okay,
bias.
to get a little bit more out of that, what about like the rock stars in the group that are publishing all the time versus a PhD student versus someone who, like who's going to have the time to look at a paper? You know what I'm saying? If you want to get someone who's going to say yes to a review, and then like how do you find people that are kind of would be interested in your topic to read? Because that's part of the thing. If the topic doesn't resonate with them, they're not gonna
So
click yes, right?
yeah, when I first started out, I was asked to put reviewers down. This is more of a newer thing. In the 15 years ago, they didn't ask me for reviewers. The challenge side though um, is actually finding. Okay, could someone turn their mic off, please? Got some feedback. The challenge side is finding a reviewer. If I'm first starting out, look at what you have online or the references you have and pick from that. So if there's people that you've actually referenced that you think would be good reviewers because you've read their work, put their name down.
Yeah, I think that was what I was kind of getting at. Is like if you look at your references, and if you see a name that's kind of popping up several times, that person is probably going to be motivated to look at your work because A, they like the topic, and B, they're going to get some citations out of it if it goes through. So,
And frankly, the last bit on this whole question is you have to, if they ask you to put 3 down, you need to find 3. And so don't have a lot of angst about it. Find who you think are good, 3 good people, and put it down. And then just move on to the rest of the half a day painful submission.
yeah, and when I was an editor briefly, I played all sorts of games like who's the grad student on the paper, who was the PI, trying to see who had more time, and I never found any kind of there's no relationship for any of those. So
Yeah, basically good luck gaming the system is what I think a good way to end this question.
okay, Elise, is there a student question that speaks to you that you'd like to bring up?
Yeah, I was looking for that. Well, can I just start with really quickly on this topic of what you were just talking about? Technically, is it conflict of interest to request someone who is your friend to review?
Oh, no, it is not. Unless you had some behind the scenes deal. It's like, at least you go ask your friend and go, tell you what, if you get, I'll give you $50. Or, next time you submit something, put me down and I'll treat you favorably. No, that's just not how science is supposed to be. And but no, there's nothing wrong if you putting down someone, a peer of yours that you think would be good. Now, on the other part, the conflict of interest, if they've had some association with your work, what they should do then is say, I'm going to decline reviewing this paper because I have a conflict of interest because I already know something about it. And that would be really, I've been asked to review things and I've declined for that particular reason because I thought
Yeah.
I would have a bias is what it comes down to.
And if you think about it, like, they shouldn't know who it is, but things might give it away if it's a blind system, right? But like, if you work in, like, say, root nematodes of hemp or something, right? Like, and you're looking to get that pool of people that can review you probably know them all, you know.
Yeah.
And hopefully you're at least they like you and you're kind of friends. So that, I mean, there'd be a lot of potential conflicts if that was your threshold, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
just when we get into these specialized fields, there's only so many people to go around, and you've probably interacted with many of them,
Yeah. And
So,
this kind of indirectly relates to the question, the strategy when you submit, should you make some things blinded, like the research, if there's something about the methods where you worked in your lab at the University of Illinois, should you black that out? Which you can. You can black out and blind things you think may give you away. I personally don't care. I just personally feel that if someone knows who I am, that they're going to be ethical and review without any bias. And
mhm,
if they don't like me and they reject me because of that, so be it. We'll find another home for this journal.
mhm, mhm.
And if I think I was treated unfairly, you can always appeal. And so I just rejected a paper yesterday, and I was rooting for this paper, but I thought if I had sent it out for peer review, it'd get rejected. So I'm saving them that hassle. But they appealed this morning, which I'm happy for. And I'll give them a little guidance on perhaps how to make it so it could actually get out and not be rejected when it goes out for review. They didn't show their methods. They had it in some supplemental information areas, which no, it needs to be in the methods part. They got some bad advice. So I'll have that conversation and maybe they can submit it again. So
Sounds very reasonable. Well, another student question that's related to this is about the cover letter. Um, you know, typically this book talked about putting your cover letter together. There's some questions about that. One of them that I liked was, you're supposed to say who all the authors are and this and that. And the question was, do you leave the what did it say exactly? I don't want to paraphrase it. When you're submitting, should you acknowledge in the cover letter that you're a grad student or early career writer, or is this seen as unprofessional, or is it going to be in conflict with this whole conversation about, blind stuff?
yeah, put in there whatever you feel comfortable with and don't worry. On the other hand, I will tell you this, we look very little at that cover letter. So you could spend hours and hours on this cover letter and I'll look at it. Oh, they got a cover letter. I'll spend 10 seconds on it because it's not that your cover letter is unimportant, but journals, for example, MDPI, they'll say you have to have these two statements in there, one that's original work not being considered elsewhere. So I'd put that in there. Your book suggests that. And they have some other little phrase, and that's easy. I just copy and paste it from MDPI, put it in my cover letter
It's probably
because
like that all the authors have seen the work and agree.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. That was the other one, that all the authors are in agreement that this is ready to submit. And so those would be a couple statements you'd put in there. But I'd look at the journal. If they say, I would just copy and paste from the journal. You're not plagiarizing. You're just saying, I've done it in accordance to your requirements, such as, and then you put them in there. But yeah, make it though professional. Put it on letterhead, put a date, put your address, dear Dr. Chen, for, as the editor of and chief of UF-UG, and then say we're happy to submit this, but I would spend less than an hour on the cover letter, because your work is really what's going to be judged. The people that look at it for peer review, they're not going to see the cover letter, and the cover letter itself will not really, for me, be the deal breaker whether it goes out or not. But for like some journals, they have handlers that they'll look to see if these statements are in the cover letter. So number one rule, always look what the journal's asking for and follow their guidance. So you don't have what Andrew said earlier, such as the 76-page style manual that he just did not want to look at.
I looked at it, that was a problem.
Yeah, it's like, holy crap, I'll just roll the dice. Darn it.
Yeah, so that brought up a point. So Elise mentioned, are you worried about giving too much up in your cover letter? Who sees the cover letter, and who doesn't get blinded from you? Who in the process knows who the authors are?
Yeah, it depends on the journal. If it's an open access journal that is a non-blind, the cover letter may be seen. That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. For journals that are blind review, so the reviewers don't know who you are, they will not see the cover letter. All they'll see is, your title, the abstract, and then anything you wrote from the introduction through the references. They may see supplemental information, or at least have access to that if they choose to. But yeah, anything about you, cover letter that could give you away, unless you put Easter eggs in your paper, like the lab you're working at, the room number, emails. Yeah.
So the editors probably will know who you are, even in the blind system, right?
Oh, definitely. We will know who you are. No ifs, ands, or buts about that.
It's the reviewers who don't know.
Yeah. So I would not be concerned if you're an undergrad. If you're an undergrad and you write a paper that's worthy to be, accepted for publication, fantastic. It doesn't matter really. And like career professional, if you write something that is worthy to be published, fantastic. So, but spend as little time. Don't spend days and days unless you want to. Okay.
So this happens to me every once in a while. I'll see a figure in a paper that I really like, but it might be like in traditional forestry pathology. I'm trying to adapt it for the urban context. Do you have a sense of how much it needs to be adapted before it's unique enough to like meet the bar of your own work, or like, adapted from? And what's the kind of etiquette around, or not even etiquette, like what is required when you adapt a figure?
Great question. When I was a graduate student, I remember Jeff Dawson would always say, just put adapted from, and literally you could take a table and these were, I wouldn't do that anymore. But I would say just adapted from, and then you put the reference that it came from, and life moves on. I think Deb Hilbert had an excellent case where she did a fantastic job adapting the decline spiral, and then actually adding in how trees relate to it. But she was very clear on that this was adapted from Dan Mannion's work. But hers was, she didn't just take that image, she kind of recrafted it. So what's the fine line? I don't know. I think your best way though is journals will have, again, the rights and permissions. You could go to Elsevier and then go through the process requesting the permission to use this image. And then if you do any modifications to it, like adding in a few little boxes and arrows, you're covered. Yeah, and really a journal may ask you to do that anyways. Somewhere during the review process, they'll ask you, do you have the rights and permissions to use external images that are not yours? So I think that's really the answer to this.
Sounds good. And Elise, your turn. What did you see in there?
Okay, there are some questions that I like that relate to like the timeline of submittal. Things like, I'm just going to rattle off a few, and then you can like pick them apart. But what if you submit and it's taking a really long time in the review process? Can you just revoke your submission and send it somewhere else? What do you do about, you plan to probably talk about your research at a conference or something, or in some other presentation before you plan to submit to a journal? What do you need to like take care of to make sure you're like in the right in terms of everything that's kind of confusing, like copyright and things like that. And I think there was one other, but I'll let you kind of tackle those to start.
Yeah. So my advice is if it gets longer than maybe 2 to 3 months for typical journals, I would write to the editor and or whoever is the handling editor of it, and just say, I'm just curious the status of this paper is. Now, a week later, that's probably too soon, but 2 to 3 months. And the editor could say, I'm waiting for reviews back from people. People are busy. And so getting the example I talked about earlier where I desk rejected something, I'm actually doing a favor for this person, although they didn't know it, because they'd probably sit for 2 to 3 months and get the same result back that I just told them. And so I'll have a conversation to let's get it to the level that it will go out and you won't have this issue that I'm seeing right now. So 2 to 3 months, some journals are speedier than that, but that's not a bad time frame. It's your work. Even though you've attributed a copyright, well, first of all, it's not accepted for publication. I think you're getting at, could I use it in a conference? Definitely. But even if it was accepted as a paper now, and it's in print or digital print, I mean, you still have some rights. What you've crafted away was certainly the copyright of how it's laid out in a journal, the format of tables, but through the fair use doctrine, even if it wasn't your work, you could take a table and then present about that and talk about it in a in a educational setting, whether it's even if it's for profit, because you're just talking about the idea and you're not stealing the whole totality of the idea, if that helps. So don't have worries about like now if you plagiarized where you just took someone's talk, and I've had that happen before, the only thing changed was my name, and that, yeah. It was really bad when I was at a location going, that's half my talk that you just gave. I'm saying that I didn't say anything to the person, I just let them roll. So yeah, those things unfortunately happen. Getting back to your heart of your question, yeah, I won't worry about presenting your novel ideas. That help?
Yeah, I mean, I think, don't they say plagiarism is the highest form of flattery? I think that's how it goes.
Yeah, it's the highest form of embarrassment when you get caught, I think.
But yeah, I think if I have a journal article that was accepted or like published, and I grab a table or figure from that for my talk, I will cite the article just so people know where it's coming from.
Yeah.
Because if they see the figure and they're like, oh, that's cool, I want to see what the rest is there, then they know where to go to find the rest of it.
Man, the snipping tool is so easy these days. I just snip a part of the journal header along with the authors, and that it's so simple these days to really attribute work to people. Don't be lazy, I think and I'm not saying you're lazy people, but just take that do easy process to attribute to people their creative ideas.
Yeah, learn the snipping tool or Control-Shift for your Mac users out there. Those are amazing tools to get just to get the whole like top of the the byline and the title and the journal stuff and put it next to that, and it looks great.
Oh man, we had to use Control-Alt print screen and then hope you got a good image.
I'll look at mine and see if I can find one. I should have done this earlier.
We did have a good one, Andrew, that relates to like the process. You had one about what's the etiquette for if like your co-authors are being slow or something like that.
Okay, so yeah, I mean,
did I butcher that? Sorry.
No, that's perfect. So like, that's perfect. So you're working with multiple co-authors, and you want them to put, they have to accept the final version, right? If you're going to submit it with their name on it. So how many times do you let them look at it is one question. So like you had the final draft, you sent it back to them. Do they get to look at it like 4 or 5 times before you submit it? And then if you got one that's just really busy and slow and just is non-responsive whatsoever, what do? Can you give them even like a deadline?
Oh, this is simple. I'm in this situation right now. I've been waiting for, I don't know, 3 weeks for comments. So I just use the multiple technique called pestering. So in like survey responses, we call it the Dillman method of multiple contacts. I just call it pestering because I learned that as a kid. If you pester your parents enough about getting ice cream, they may finally give in. Like, fine, we'll go to Dairy Queen. Just stop asking. But you find creative ways. Don't always use the same technique like email. Get on the phone. Send a text. Send a snail mail. Okay. Send out the sheriff. I haven't had to do that yet, but I suppose there may be a time I might have to. But yeah, that's a tough one. You just want to be professional, and this individual's busy, like I am, and I'm not worried. We'll get the comments. All my other reviewers thought the paper is ready to go out, but I still am sitting back going, is there something that is just totally crazy about this paper that my collaborator will go, I'm not comfortable with this. So then what do you do? Well, I would just say, well, if you're not comfortable, do you not want to be an author? And then we move on from that. So
yeah, I actually stepped away from a paper once that I was just not comfortable with the method.
Yep.
And I like it was friends of mine, and I'm just like, you guys can go on this alone, I'm fine. And it got published, there's no big deal, so
yeah, and I've done that a couple times. I've actually once with you, Andrew, I walked away from a study because I just don't have time. If I wanted the doors of my locks not to be changed, my door locks, I had kids, I had to be at home. And so, yeah, I walked away from a paper because it wasn't good to my collaborators to have delay their stuff because I don't have time. So that's not a bad as a person. If you don't have the time, do I regret walking away? I do, definitely, but I had to. It just wasn't good for the team.
And so I read there's a book I think I took a screenshot of. It's called How to Write a Lot. If you just Google that, and I like the first edition better than the second. I was reading that again.
Yeah.
And one of the things he advised was you can give a time frame. You can like, hey, this is the statement. It's like, I'm done with this. I would love to have your feedback, before this date, like 10 to 14 days or more. And if you want to remain an author on the paper, please give me some feedback by then. And if you're fine with it as is, just check. One thing I'll add is like, if you're fine with it, just check the byline, so at a minimum. But yeah, so I mean, especially if there was someone who like helped earlier drafts and they've seen it and they know what the stats are and stuff. It's just the final glossing over.
Yeah.
Like, and then that's kind of abrupt. But it's very honest,
No, I'm so glad you, first of all, offer that to everyone, because that is brilliant advice. And number two, I'm going to take it because actually that's a good strategy. And the next time I email this individual, fortunately, I'll be with this person at a conference next week, so I can actually, we can chat then over it. But yeah, just be professional. And I like your advice you gave to everyone is just, if you're happy with this, just please acknowledge. I know your time's busy and that.
And do you think that changes? The follow-up for that question is, does that change that ability to set a timeline? Do you think that would change if you're a grad student versus a senior PI?
Yeah, if you're talking about like power.
Yeah,
definitely. I think if I was a junior faculty or a grad student and I was afraid of, well, first of all, you shouldn't, because people need to be ethical and treat you fairly, regardless of your status and that. But yeah, I would feel uncomfortable if I'm a junior faculty because people are making decisions. So what I would do is I would talk to my best mentor and get advice from them on how I would treat this. Because even though, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think like, if you're doing this, if you're trying to set a time frame to get someone out the door, if you have your advisor's back, or your advisor has your back, sorry.
Yep.
I think that's about it, what you need, honestly. So you don't want to surprise your advisor with this.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you said that, because that's the other thing on all the submission stuff. I've had things submitted that I was the mentor from. I'm like, I wish you would have talked to me before you submitted this, because there's a few typos and actually the analysis was wrong. This is last year's work. Yeah.
So yeah. So again, getting everyone's permission before you submit.
Yeah.
Especially your advisor. Elise, would you like to go? And then I'll look.
Well, in the chat, you had sent one that from Lillian that Stephanie also had a question about. So it was, if my MS thesis has already been accepted by my university and my degree has already been awarded, what am I legally able to do with it under copyright? Share, publish, parts of it in a journal, things like that.
You've published and deposited your thesis or dissertation. What can you do with that research?
Well, what I did when I was taught this when I was in my master's program from one of my one of the PhD students in the lab was, that's your work. The University of Illinois doesn't own it. Put your copyright on there. So now you've said, this is my work. And I think that still flies. Does University of Florida own your work?
Yeah, actually, now you say that, I was just thinking about the copyright page because I had student ones who like
Yeah.
messed up 4 things on the copyright page, and I'm like, there's just like 4 things on it, but it was like, it's just like your name, the date, and the copyright symbol, I think.
Yes.
So you are the one who owns it.
Yeah. So you own it. The university doesn't, unless they have something otherwise, but my institution doesn't own stuff. They got enough other things to worry about, whether owning master thesis or PhD dissertations and that. The tricky part though is I would just advise being careful of if it's going to be repositoried with some private institution. I think ProQuest is one of them, and I'm not saying anything negative about this company, but they'll publish theses and then request money to get it printed. So and in my case, those were the days you just wanted to get this stuff. This was kind of where it's easy to make PDFs of things and have them stored. So it's like, use these services to get your things out there. But they then own a copyright of this because you've agreed to it. And I could be incorrect on my analogy of how it goes, but I just say, be careful if you have your copyrighted stuff that you want to retain, because you don't have to use these private entities. We just did because it was kind of like gratifying. It's like, ooh, someone wants my work, to put it in their system. And in hindsight, I wish I would have said no. So,
but I think to kind of tie that up again, I think if it's your dissertation work, or your thesis work, I typically have my students write it as the manuscript. Yep. And we pick like a format that at least one of the papers will go into like that journal, because even the formatting guidelines are pretty fluid as long as you're consistent, and they care about the title page a whole lot. And but so that just gets ported into a journal, and it will be changed by the time you get done. It won't be exactly the same because your reviewers are going to have feedback for you. So
highly unlikely will not be changed.
Yeah. Unless you get some good reviewers, honestly.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for the accepted with no revisions. I've been on 1 or 2 papers. It was close. Accepted with minor revisions. I've changed like 2 typos. But yeah, it's hoping for that day, except with no revisions, and then I'll retire, I guess. I'm never retiring, Andrew, is a good deal.
Okay, so the book, here's some formatting things, because it is kind of, like this is making it look nice. Okay, here's the first question to set this all up. I was getting a little ahead of myself. So here's the question to set this whole next slew of questions up. We shared an advisor at Illinois who once told us to leave a few typos in the paper, because if you give the reviewers something to pick at that's minor, they won't see that fatal flaw in your methods, and they'll leave you alone, right? What do you think of that review, that advice?
Well, Andrew, that was during the golden era of academics, where people are just generally nice people, and they're looking for that one typo so they can give you positive feedback. It's like, oh, you misspelled a spell. Yeah. Oh, okay, yay. No, you know my advice on this. It's submit what you think is going to be accepted with no revisions, because if you submit a typo with the idea that someone's looking for things that are flawed, then you're never going to get the accepted with no revisions. So treat it as a goal of this thing goes, and this is the best work. My advice to students whenever they write something for me is, when you submit it to me, if you have reservations about it's not ready to submit to me, unless you want to get some feedback on something in particular. So definitely when you get ready to submit, you look at this going, I am damn proud of this. And I hope that others are also, and you may be surprised that others are also really, yeah, this is good stuff. Or they may go, boy, you didn't think of this, this, or this. And that's where you're turning the negative into a positive. It's like, oh, I didn't think about these angles about my research. And the other part is I like to put limitations in my papers, because I'm now addressing actually to the reviewers. I'm giving them the typos. I'm giving them the problems without no typos. So I'm saying, well, here's where our work falls short. But on the other hand, the limitations then bring science to the next level. If I address, it's like, well, I know every study has limitations, Okay. I'm addressing some of the issues, but I'm turning into a positive of how I'd actually recreate this in a new study. And maybe someone else that takes your idea, because I don't have enough time to do the things I need to do. So that's my advice on taking Jeff's advice of putting typos in there, treat it as limitations, but that's just me.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. If there's a very obvious limitation in your methods, I would address it right off the bat, because
Yes.
someone's going to pick on it, so you can get ahead of the game a little bit, right? And
Yeah.
they're not like, if they're going to reject it because of that limitation, at least it's right out there and it's going to move on quicker, and you can go to the next journal, right?
Yeah, and this ties back that cover letter question. I was reading up there on special issues. If there's anything you want this paper to be done with, there was a question was, what about special issues? Yeah, put that in the cover letter, or make sure you check the right box. Because I screwed up with the submission just the other day. I checked the wrong box, and then they asked me, what do you really want this paper? Is it research or short communication? But yeah, address that in the cover letter of really what you want them to do. But then don't treat the limitations in the cover letter to the editors like, here's where our things fall down. Put it in there where you want the reviewers to see this. And reviewers actually it's a motivation. They'll look at that going, they're not perfect either, just like me.
Mhm.
So
Amy Blood writes, if she's catching typos, she becomes more critical of the work because it might
yes,
that other things are done sloppily. So I had that same comment in a paper. I embrace the mindset that
yep,
I'm a busy tenure track professor. I just got to crank stuff out, and eventually it'll get through. And I had enough people say, well, if this person's got these typos, what does it say about their data management? And I'm like, whoa,
yeah.
whoops, we got to walk back on that, you know? So
Well, I have to run to a grad student meeting in 2 minutes, and I think you go till noon, correct?
we go to 1:30, but you knew 12:30 your time, but I can continue on.
Oh, could you? I feel bad. I
No,
thought
that's
it
fine.
ended
This has
at
been great.
noon.
This has been great. So
Well, so then my last bit of advice, just make sure you know when things end, what everyone's asking for before you schedule other meetings on top of meetings.
no worries, man. No, this is perfect. This is just how we roll. So uh,
Yeah.
I'll do my best to hold down the fort.
Oh man, I have all the confidence in the world. Andrew always says, "Oh, my mentor for life." Actually, I flip it around. We're collaborators, and Andrew's a mentor of mine because I learned from him. Serious, and vice versa. My grad students, they're mentors of mine because I learned from them of just creative ideas. And the last bit of advice, I always think about the statement of "You stand on the shoulders of others," and I always led what one of my good mentors, Gary Johnson, would say. He goes, "Yeah, I just hang around smart people that make me look good." Okay, and so
I
the
feel.
world is, the world is a huge place to work with people. Find good people to work with, treat them well, and if they don't treat you well, just don't work with them anymore. So,
Good work.
all
Thank you.
right,
Love that.
Thanks, Rich.
you bet you, Elise. Take care, everyone.
Oh, okay, folks. Well, so my next follow-up was and I can't ask questions myself, so I'm gonna just kind of go into what I was going with that question set. I was next gonna ask him about like, okay, so the reading had said something about double spacing and then starting a new section on every new page. And I will say that I do the double spacing unless the journal has a different format. I think it's archaic. I think it's silly. No one does anything beyond track changes or PDF comments anymore. But I still follow that. You often have to, as you saw in my document, you often have to put line numbers on your document, and that's something that is in one of the ribbons in Word. And the line numbers are really helpful because it lets the reviewer say on line, and it's usually continuous, so it's like from 1 to 800 all the way down at the bottom, or 1,000 or whatever lines it is, it doesn't repeat on every page, because that's kind of a pain to say page 1 line 1, page 7 line 12. It allows people to make very organized comments on what they have a problem with, and you don't have to search with it. The problem is when you're going back in reviews, those line numbers change. So make sure you print off a PDF of the original version that you can reference every time to see where the original line numbers were. So, but don't worry about starting a new section on a new page. That leaves a lot of white space in my mind. And from a design aspect and a visual aspect, having a lot of white space is no bueno. So, and then one last thing that I was going to ask Rich was that he would have harped on is how, and I'm going to open it after that just to student questions, okay? Is what do you do with your figures and your tables? You know, do you put them in text? You leave them at the bottom? And how nice do they have to look? And Rich would have said, because he's harped on me a lot for this on our papers that we write together, is make those tables look as good as you can. If they're really big and you can't fit them in the profile layout of a paper, you need to do some section breaks and make that that section of table landscape so that it all can fit in there in one page, hopefully, right? Because if the tables look like crud, it's just like having typos in your paper, but it's even more blatant because it's taking up half a page and it catches your eye, right? Tables are meant to catch your eye. And if they don't look good, it's like a typo on steroids. Same thing with figures. Make sure that they look good. They're of high enough quality that they're not blurry. And I will put all of these in text if allowed by the journal. That one terrible journal that I talked about that made me put all the metadata in, they wanted them at the bottom of the page, and reviewers hate that. They hate looking at a PDF, seeing insert table 1 here, and then scrolling through 13 pages to see that table, and then scrolling back up to see what was their thought about, what did they go down to the table for in the first place. So please put them in text if allowed by the journal. Sometimes journals do not allow that, and that is again a hangover from the typing and submitting paper copies days. So I'm going to open up just purely to student questions after this. So, and you guys can just turn off your mics and talk if you want to. If we do it in an ordered way.
Yeah, I did give folks the option this week in the chat to send it direct message or to everyone, because I don't want to stifle anybody who wants to ask a question, but everybody still sent to me directly. So I don't know. The questions are good, so you guys don't have to feel weird about it. So one question I want to, kind of a two-parter. I don't know why I always do two-parter type questions, but one question was about the pros and cons of alternative publishing methods like open access journals or self-publishing on websites, for example. Do you have any preferences on those? I know you do traditional journals, but do you have any thoughts on those other methods these days?
So I think that if you're looking to advance your career and you want a job that requires publication, of course you need to have a journal article, right? Eventually. But there's other aims and goals in science. So if your goal and your advisor's goal is aligned with this, is to just get the information out there, you can submit a preprint and never follow up and never try to publish it, right? And these things they have a DOI, they are easy to upload, they are maintained, people actually look at them, and then you get some statistics on who is looking at it. And that is a website you don't have to maintain yourself, right? It's probably always going to be there until everything collapses, right? So another thing, if you do your own website, that's great too, but you may not have the traffic. And it, as an author, I'm less likely to cite a website just because it's complex. And I only do it when I really need to, because it's just not available elsewhere, So, but maybe your audience isn't another academic, maybe it's the general public, and then of course do whatever, put it on TikTok, right? If that's what you want to get out there. Just know that having peer review shows some level of validation that your results they pass the test. I don't think the general public cares, honestly. So
yeah,
was
can
there a
I
follow-up to that?
Yeah. So the second part that I needed to collect my thoughts on before asking it is about copyright when it comes to things like online fact sheets. Like UF has lots of these IFAS fact sheets and articles online. You have lots of them that you've made. Are these copyrighted, or, what information can go from that into a paper? Or is it always like the paper comes first and then these other sheets come second?
Let me look at what Edith says. What I will say is that whenever I am publishing for a different audience, I am not taking big chunks of, I would never consider taking big chunks of a journal article and porting it into an EDIS fact sheet, an extension fact sheet, or a tech transfer article for one of the trade journals, like the popular journals, because that's just not the right audience, right? Figures, I admit that I typically just grab if it's a cool figure from a paper, I will just put the figure in that article and cite the original source, and it's never come back to haunt me, but I probably should ask permission from the publisher. But often the articles that I am publishing that are something that I would put in a fact sheet are going to like my ISA's journal, AUF, and they're very open compared to like one of the big companies like Springer, so I don't worry about that. The things that are going in like those higher impact journals that are really tight, the general public doesn't care about. It's just academics. So yeah, anyways, so I'm looking up a coffee borer fact sheet that's popped up, and I'm going to look at the very bottom and see if I can see what they say for copyright here. This public, they don't have any copyright on here. It is just saying that there's information about the authors and the publication and EDIS and its numbers and all. So there's no copyright listed on there, which surprises me. So, but yeah, so those are more open, I would say, in that regard. But yeah, I mean, if you're using figures, it never hurts to just send an email to the publisher and like, can I put this in the trade article? Or do it ahead of time, and then if you do the extension fact sheet first, you're covered.
Cool, gotcha. And then this was a question I had for you and Rich, but you've both authored books, co-authored books, and so I was hoping you might just say a little bit about what that process was like for you. And I know you're doing a lot more journal stuff than book stuff, but do you have anything you could share about that process for folks maybe who might want to write a book one day?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, there are folks that are in book writing fields. If you're in the social science field, you do need to write a book if you want to advance in your career as an academic. There are university presses. University of Florida has one. It's the University Press of Florida, UPF. And that is where I published one of my books through. So there are different grades and there are different prestige levels of presses, and different university presses and industry presses specialize in different topics. So you want to see where people are publishing in your field, and then you'll get a sense of who does it, and then you can look at the prestige and be like, okay, maybe the University of Chicago Press is where I want to shoot for this, right? Because that's one of the higher ones, and what you'll do is you can meet editors at conferences. You can send prospectus to an editor, as a cold thing. And then like you're pitching your idea to them to see if they want to add it to their, their list, their, publications, their bullpen. So, and then after that, you will get an agreement with them, and you may have the book already written, which makes it great. Otherwise, they'll send you a timeline, which you will probably blow by year after year. Like I have my poem book, University of Florida, and then feel guilty about it as you talk about it right now. So, but yeah, and then once they've accepted it, I don't know. I don't think any academic presses will pay you, anything up front like you would with like the popular publishing, out there, like for like novels and stuff. But I have worked out royalties with my books. So out of, I don't know what, I think 25% of the sales goes to my lab, which is a couple thousand a year to like fund travel for folks like Elise and others to go to conferences and stuff like that. So that is a switch from a journal article, which gives you nothing but prestige. And often you're paying them to publish it. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. And I think later on in the book, they talk a bit more about other things that you would write besides scientific journal articles. So maybe we'll get into it more in the future. But and then you said earlier folks could unmute themselves and ask a question, but I do want to ask, one student asked in their own situation, they said, if I'm splitting one large project into 2 publications and I have both manuscripts ready at the same time, is it ill-advised to submit both at the same time? Both to the same journal at the same time? And they're closely related, but not so much that one's going to require citing the other. That's what they said.
Wow. I mean, I my gut reaction would be to worry myself. I think Rich would be a better one to answer this one, because if it's on the same, okay, here's the thing. How closely related is it? Is it the same data set, and so you're a lot of the methods are the same, and then you are publishing it, looking at this part of the data and that part of the data? I think that would, if the same editor got it by some chance, they might think splitting. But then again, like once they submit it to reviewers, it's gonna be different reviewers looking at both manuscripts, right? So, I mean, you'll find out really quick if someone's raising an eyebrow, So, I mean, honestly, there's no harm in doing it. They'll let you know right away what they think, or you could just wait like a week, 2 months. People have a lot of stuff on their plates and may not even put it together, So, I don't know. That's a tough question. I haven't had that pop up in my own experience, so.
Gotcha. Well, I have some others here that people submitted, but if anybody wants to ask, we've got a few more minutes.
Okay, well, if we're not hearing anything, if you have more, we can ask. Otherwise, we can just call it a week, and you guys can enjoy your weekends.
Yeah, I think, I feel bad excluding any, but I feel like everybody probably wants to go get on with their Friday.
Yeah, someone did mention like word counts. I think Amber said that, and no one really checks that. Although I will say that one journal that I submitted to had me write down the word counts as metadata, and in that case, that did become a thing. So, but if it's not asking you that, nowhere in your reviewing does the reviewer see the word count of your document. So as long as it isn't egregious and people are like burdened by it, I would be fine with a little bit more, maybe like 20% more. I don't know. No one's gonna notice that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So.
I guess one question that came early on and I kind of missed was, I'd be interested to get your take, is what is the worst punishment for the author by the journal if we violate, what did they say, the right issue in our publication? I'm not exactly sure if that's a typo, but yeah. So if you, what's the worst thing that can happen to you?
I think they could come after you in court. I think it would come down to like, what was the monetary gain from what you did, which I don't know what that is. But yeah, there are legal rights associated with that. I know, the only thing I have experience was I was listening to a podcast with photographers, and their photo was stolen for a product. And when it went through like copyright court and they figured out how much the company made from that photo, and then that went to the photographers minus like the 50% the lawyers took. So
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, it doesn't look good, retractions look terrible. If you're like early in your career and you're trying to find employment, or you're trying to keep your employment on the tenure track, having retractions for something like a copyright infringement or plagiarism would follow you to your assessments and to your interviews and make it hard to advance your career. So just I'd say those are the real costs right there. People could even lose their jobs, So
Mhm.
if it was blatant and repeated, I'm sure.
Gotcha. Thank you. I think we're probably good. Unless
Okay.
someone else thought of something, but yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone again this week. I'll put the recording up. I don't think I sent the recording from last week. I'll send those both out in an email. It's been pretty hectic right now. So our next speakers are Dr. Gary Valad, who's at my research center, a real sharp person who publishes a lot, is an editor in pathology. So we'll have his take on the review process. We'll also have my advisor, she's the one who gave me her method of responding to reviewers, and I use it all the time. So take care, everyone, and enjoy your weekends.
Thank you. You too.
Yep, bye.